Okay, should I just go ahead then?
Uh, Jerry, you really don't need an introduction. But we are so thankful that you're here. And as you said, 60 years of writing, and we're kind of curious what you've been cooking up. So please go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm really pleased to have this opportunity, and Ruth and I are missing seeing all of you in person. So this technology allows us to get at least a peek at some of you that we miss seeing in person. So thank you all so much for tuning in. In the way of, well, before I really get started talking about my newest novel, Settlers Valley, a couple of announcements. Those of you that are interested in learning more about, I don't know if you can all see that, more about my work, go to my website. It's just jerryapps.com. And I also have a email address, obviously, and that's jerryappsauthor@gmail.com. And I've been in touch with a Mystery to Me bookstore, and I asked them if they had copies of this novel there, and they do. So anybody who might be interested in purchasing a copy of Settlers Valley, Mystery to Me bookstore has it. So let's get started. And by the way, here's the book. This is what it looks like. Settlers Valley, published by the University of Wisconsin Press last year. So it's quite fresh off the presses. I want to start by thanking Don Klimple, Colonel Don Klimple. I don't know if you all know that Don was a colonel in the U.S. Army and worked with hospitals all over the place. And so Don helped me with this manuscript a lot, because the focal point of it is on veterans who are a group of veterans who are disabled and with both physical and mental problems. And they moved to this fictional town that I've created in central Wisconsin called Link Lake. And just to back up a little bit, this is my 8th novel in this series that I've been writing about Ames County. I don't know where I came up with that. And Link Lake as one of the villages in that county. So Settlers Valley is located in Ames County near Link Lake. What I've tried to do with these novels, and I'm very concerned about a lot of things, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I wrote this particular novel. But the novels that I've written so far deal with issues that face rural America. I'm an old farm boy, as most of you know, growing up on a farm west of Waldorf. I still have a farm in that area. So my novels deal with questions of land use, of food safety, soil conservation, the demise of the small family farm, industrial sized farming. Those are all major themes that thread through my novels. I've found in my writing, and I've written a bunch of nonfiction books as well, that by writing a novel, by writing a story, I can get at issues in a better way, I believe, than if I just wrote about them in a nonfiction fashion. So the question I often get when I speak to groups about my books, why did you write this one? Why did you write Settlers Valley? Well, I am concerned, I'm very concerned about the future of rural America and its farms. Our food supply, I'm concerned about that. Everybody should be concerned about that as you see what's happening in the country today. I'm concerned about the rural villages. They were sprinkled all across the upper Midwest, in fact, throughout much of the country. The villages depending on the farmers, and the farmers depending on the villages. There was a coexistence going on that was wonderful. And now many of these villages are just a shadow of what they once were. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the environment and what needs to be done to protect it. And I've written several things that relate to that, both fiction and nonfiction. And today I'm very concerned about our fractured society, with people taking up sides against each other. You're either for it or you're against it. And I'm going to speak to that some more because I take that up in this book. And then I want to, through this book specifically, I want to illustrate one way that people with severe emotional and physical problems can find relief by working the land, whether it be a garden in the backyard or whether it be 20 acres someplace. Working the land as a way of dealing with emotional and physical problems. I'll say a lot more about that as we go along. To get us started, I want to read a little bit of the first chapter so that you get some feel for who the characters are and what's going on. The big German shepherd got up from his rug back of the kitchen wood stove and padded to the bedroom. There he found C.J. Anderson still asleep. The big dog stopped by the bed, looking at his master, listening to his quiet breathing, wagging his tail. He stepped forward, stuck out his tongue, and licked C.J. on the face. C.J.'s eyes snapped open. "Lucky, it's you," he said. The big dog looked at C.J. as if to say, "What'd you expect would be licking your face on a chilly April morning?" C.J. got out of bed, found his prosthesis leg, attached it, and pulled on a red checked flannel shirt and a worn pair of blue jeans. He walked out to the kitchen with Lucky at his side, ready to support his master if necessary. C.J. was 28, big man of about 6'3", with a ruddy complexion. Since moving to Ames County 2 years ago, he had worn a full black beard. He plugged in the coffee pot and then crumpled up some old newspapers, pushed them into the cook stove, and touched a match to them. He had learned how to cook on this old relic of a stove from his grandfather, Oscar Anderson, who lived just a half mile down the road from his little log cabin in the woods, as his grandfather called it. He opened the kitchen door to let Lucky outside and filled the shepherd's dish with dog food. C.J. had built this log cabin with the help of several of his veteran friends. It was one story with a combined living room and dining room, 2 bedrooms. One C.J. used as an office. The other was where he slept, and a bathroom. It had a covered porch on the front and an open deck in the back. C.J. prided himself by creating his own energy with a wind turbine and some solar panels. He poured a cup of coffee, stepped outside to the porch where Lucky waited. He sat on his Aldo Leopold bench. The simple angular bench named after the famed conservationist had been one of C.J.'s first carpentry projects. Not only was it comfortable, but when he sat on it, it reminded him of Leopold's writings and how they had influenced him to take up his grandfather's gift of the land. C.J. had grown up in Madison, where his father had been a professor at the University of Wisconsin. His parents had died in a car accident during his last tour in Afghanistan. C.J. thought the only thing about that tragedy that could be considered a blessing was what they hadn't seen him suffer when he was hit by a roadside bomb and ended up losing his leg below the knee. C.J. had grown up a city boy, but he spent his summers working on his grandfather's farm in Ames County. Now he lived in the back corner of that farm. When C.J. had returned home from Afghanistan, missing a leg, mourning his parents, and uncertain what to do with his life, he'd had many lengthy discussions with his grandfather about how to pick up the pieces. Oscar Anderson, his grandfather, gave him 5 acres of land. CJ had kept in contact with his fellow veterans he had gotten to know when he was at Walter Reed Hospital. His reports about his life as a small-scale farmer in central Wisconsin had convinced several of them to join him in Settlers Valley. Oscar Anderson had talked with several of his farmer neighbors in Settlers Valley who also agreed to rent small acreages of land with rent-to-purchase agreements to these veterans. All of the landowners agreed to do this with Oscar Anderson's encouragement. Now, just 2 years later, 15 veteran families were renting small acreages in Settlers Valley. Most of the vets were in their late 20s or early 30s. Some, like CJ, had lost limbs or had some other combat-related disability. All had some degree of post-traumatic stress disorder. Other than CJ, none of the vets had experienced farming. They leaned heavily on Oscar Anderson and the other local retired farmer, Fred Russo, Oscar's friend, who together served as informal consultants to the group and offered the use of their equipment as well. With the help of these old-time farmers, the veterans and their families had already established an impressive array of small farming operations. Most grew vegetables, lettuce, sweet corn, radishes, beets, green beans, yellow beans, kale, carrots, potatoes, and other vegetables. One raised pasture-fed hogs. Another had free-range chickens and maintained several beehives. One man grew hops and barley to supply the recently opened Link Lake Brewery. One Navy vet had some experience with ropes made of hemp, and he was now growing industrial hemp. The veterans had christened themselves the Back to the Land Veterans and held a well-attended farmers market in Link Lake every Saturday in the summer. And recently they had formed the Back to the Land Grocery Cooperative, where they sold produce year-round. And they maintained a small office there staffed by volunteers. I won't go on with that chapter, but to tell you that what they were doing in this small farming community, Settlers Valley, near Link Lake, did not go well with everyone who lived there. Not everyone was supportive of the idea of small acreage farming. It seems preposterous to even think that, but it was true. And so this was a letter to the editor that C.J. Anderson wrote after getting some criticism, more criticism than he ever imagined from what he and his fellow vets were doing. This is what he wrote. This is in response to the several letters to the editor that have appeared in this paper in recent weeks. Several have been highly critical of what my fellow veterans and I have been doing since we moved to Link Lake a couple of years ago. Some writers have gone so far as calling our Back to the Land veterans a cult with secret meetings and strange celebrations. Others have said that we are not patriotic because we are questioning long-held beliefs about the role of big business, and especially the importance of industrial agriculture in our society. I fail to see the connection between big business and being patriotic. These comments especially hurt, as my fellow veterans and me, who have formed the Back to the Land Veterans Group, have each served in the country's military and fought and were wounded in the name of the United States. We met at Walter Reed Hospital when we were recovering from our wounds. To quell the rumors about who we are, what we do, and what we believe, our group is made up of disabled military veterans. We are all small acreage farmers. We believe in sustainable agriculture, which means we farm our land so when we leave, it will be in better shape than when we acquired it. I'll come back to that. We are committed to protecting the environment. We believe in the importance and power of community, As a community, we work together, play together, and worship together. We generate as much of our own energy as possible, primarily through solar and wind power. We honor the land and all of its mystery and complexity. We hope other communities will see what we are doing and will try similar efforts. I hope this answers some of the questions about the Back to the Land veterans, who we are and what we do. Our various community events are open to everyone. Our grocery cooperative in Link Lake features our member-produced fruits, vegetables, meats, and much more. It's open to everyone. We want to be good neighbors, and those who agree, and even those who don't agree with what we are doing. Signed, C.J. Anderson, Back to the Land Veterans Group, Link Lake. Religion became an important part in what was going on in Settlers Valley at that time, especially after the Veterans Group arrived. And today, 2 years after the veterans arrived in Link Lake, there are but two churches in Link Lake. One, the Church of the Holy Redeemed, whose pastor is Pastor Jacob John Jacob, and the Link Lake People's Church, led by Pastor Victoria Emerson, who was a former military chaplain. Things really heated up as the People's Church got going. And this is another letter to the editor written by the pastor of the church. Dear editor, this is in response to those living in Ames County, and especially to those living in and around Link Lake who have asked questions about the Link Lake People's Church, what we are, what we stand for, and where we come from. Let me start with the third question first. I served for 5 years in the U.S. Army as a chaplain with 2 tours in Afghanistan. I saw young men and women coming to me with questions, often life and death questions on those 2 tours. I saw death and maiming. I saw fear and guilt. I saw hatred and love, caring and sharing. I was wounded along with hundreds of others. When I left the Army 2 years ago, I did not leave my commitment to help those in need. I looked around this great country in search of a place where I could start a church and do the work I have committed my life to doing. I learned about C.J. Anderson and his fellow disabled veterans and their return to the land as an approach to healing. I was struck by learning that not only did these young men and women see the land helping them heal, they recognized that their approach to farming would also heal the land. As we heal the land, we heal ourselves. Powerful words for a torn society. Using my earnings and savings of several of my friends, I purchased the former Lutheran church in Link Lake. The church has some 150 members at this writing, and it's non-denominational. We are not part of any church hierarchy. We do not care if you are or were followers of another religion. We don't care if you never attended a church in your life or you attended every Sunday. Everyone is welcome to participate in and be part of the Link Lake People's Church. No examination, no questions asked. Here are some of our beliefs. We are a church of hope for those who have lost all hope. We are a church that cares, especially for those who need special caring. We are a church with great admiration and concern for nature and the land. We believe that much can be learned by being close to nature. We are a church without ancient dogma and rules. We believe that good always triumphs over evil. We believe in the power of critical thinking and the joy of creative thought. We believe in understanding the past and drawing the best from it, but not allowing the past to hinder what we must do today. We believe in a higher power in God, which nourish and sustain us in good times and in bad. We believe in the importance of self-reliant individuals. At the same time, we believe in the power of community, where self-reliant individuals work together for the common good. We are a church of the people and for the people. Signed, Victoria Emerson, Pastor, Link Lake People's Church. Well, can you imagine? After reading this, the pastor of the other church was irate. He wrote this letter to the editor in response to the one he had just read about the People's Church. I am astonished and profoundly troubled by what I read in your letters to the editor last week, the letter from Pastor Emerson. I am perplexed that you would allow such a letter to be published. You must realize that you are supporting the Antichrist by publishing such drivel. It is clear to me that Victoria Emerson is no pastor, but is likely a tool of the devil. How can a church be called a church without mention of the Bible as its guide? How can a church be called a church with no mention of sin and salvation, no mention of the second coming, no discussion of heaven and hell, no mention of the end times, no mention of the cross? I call on my fellow believers in the word to help abolish this so-called church, which is an abomination and should not be in the Link Lake community. Signed, Jacob John Jacob, pastor, the Church of the Holy Redeemed. So you can see now a little Link Lake with its veterans and old timers are having problems. Pastor Emerson couldn't believe that her fellow pastor would write such a letter as he had. She had invested her savings and those of her friends, and she borrowed heavily to buy the church building. And she made sure that it included a large community room, which was open to everybody. Community events of every kind, no matter if you belong to the church or not. And now she was being criticized to the point of this church should be eliminated. All of this discussion got to Oscar Anderson, the grandfather, and his friend Fred Russo. They couldn't understand what in the world is going on in this little community that we've known so well and have grown up here, and now it is tearing itself apart. And so they called a meeting, and interestingly enough, they met in Oscar Anderson's barn because he didn't have cattle anymore, and he'd cleaned up the upstairs, and this is where they met. And once the group had assembled, there was a whole bunch of folks from the neighborhood there, including many veterans. Oscar began speaking to the group. He said, "It's a troubling time. We are a country divided. We are a community divided. Never in my more than 80 years of living have I felt the necessity to take sides, to belong to one way of thinking, and to criticize those who believe and think differently than I do. This is new for Link Lake. This is new for Settlers Valley, where we are sitting today. I remember 50 years ago, the Link Lake community at the time was made up of Irish, German, Welsh, Polish, Bohemian, English, Norwegian, even a Russian family. People attended the Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Catholic churches. Some, quite a few, attended no churches at all. We supported one another's fundraisers, chili suppers and craft shows, and we attended all the wedding dances. We didn't try to convince one another that what we believed was right and what the other person believed was wrong. We worked together, we shared stories, we learned from one another." Oscar paused, and he shuffled through the few notes that he'd brought with him. "Our Link Lake community is broken, I'm sorry to say, but I see hope ahead. I see healing in our future. This church, the Link Lake People's Church, is a healing church. We can and we must help our community heal, to bring itself together, to move past finger pointing and hateful words. This church can help. But each of us, young and old, man and woman, adult and child, must also help. We will get it done through our individual actions and words, and by working together, sharing and caring for one another. No matter what our differences. Thank you. Oscar sat down. Everyone stood up and clapped. Pastor Vicky, head of the People's Church, was chairing the meeting that day. And she stood up and says, "Did anyone else have some words for us today?" And C.J. Anderson, the veteran with one leg missing, made his way to the podium. First, he said, looking at his grandfather, "I've told Grandpa this several times, but I've never mentioned it in public. Today, I want to do that. As the other veterans in this audience are aware, it was my grandpa, Oscar Anderson's idea for me to come to Settlers Valley and become a farmer. It was Grandpa Oscar's knowledge about the land and its healing powers that I didn't know until I began digging in the dirt and discovered how important working the land has been for me. I returned from Afghanistan with one good leg and a bad attitude. When I arrived at Grandpa Oscar's farm, I was a miserable, sorry sight. Just ask him, he'll tell you." TJ glanced at his grandfather, who was slowly nodding. "I'm not entirely well, not entirely whole yet, but I'm working on it. My father and my fellow farmers in the Back to the Land Veterans Group in the church are helping big time." CJ sat down. Everyone applauded. Pastor Vicky glanced at her watch and said, "Does anyone have a favorite song they'd like to sing as part of our service today?" She looked out over the crowd. A hand went up. It was Fred Russo, Oscar Anderson's old farmer buddy. Fred moved slowly to the front of the room. He was wearing a bright red shirt and his going to town bib overalls. In a loud, clear voice, Fred said, "I'd like to sing for you one of my favorite old-time songs, Amazing Grace. You are welcome to join me." Oscar was more than a little surprised to see Fred ambling toward the front of the group. He remembered how when Fred's wife was living, the two of them would sing duets in church. After Fred's wife died, he had vowed to never sing again, and he hadn't, to the best of Oscar's knowledge, until right now. In front of the gathering, with a hint of stored alfalfa hay still in the air, Fred smiled at Pastor Vicky and in a loud, clear baritone voice began singing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. As Fred sang, tears began rolling down his face, but he continued on. Soon joined by many others in the group who had remembered the old-time favorite. "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed." The next thing that happened was that the editor of the Ames County newspaper was upset too, because of the feuding that was going on, albeit by letters to the editor. And so he decided to write an editorial, which he seldom did. Billy Baxter was his name. And here's what he wrote. What we should be celebrating when we should be celebrating the coming of spring and the planting season on our farms, something dark and menacing is occurring in our community. It likely has been bubbling beneath the surface for several years, but now this thing that I don't quite know how to name has surfaced, and it isn't pretty. I'm not one to get involved with religious differences of opinion. I learned that from my father, who preceded me as editor of this newspaper. He learned the business from his father. But my father says, keep away from discussing religion, you only get into trouble. I am violating that rule. with what I'm about to write. But what is occurring in the Link Lake community needs airing out. And the problem appears to begin with religion. First, a little history. The village of Link Lake was founded by a preacher, Increase Joseph Link. That's my first novel where I write about the founding of Link Lake. It's the title of it's The Travels of Increase Joseph. The village of Link Lake was founded by a preacher, Increase Joseph Link, who with a small band of followers found their way to Ames County and Link Lake in 1852, when Indians lived freely on these lands. Pastor Increase Joseph, as people called him, promoted a religion not too different from what Pastor Emerson's Link Lake Church is about. People's Church is about. Pastor Increase Joseph's sermons are stored at the Link Lake Historical Society. Consider this passage written in 1852. We are all part of the land, have been and forever will be. As farmers, it is our God-given task to care for the land, to till it, nourish it, protect it, and above all, give it respect. In return, the land will feed us, embrace us, and give us the joy that comes from a bountiful harvest. It is our connection to the land that nourishes our souls and gives us a glimpse into God's wonderful creation. Using slightly different words, Pastor Emerson's church points in a similar direction, building on the theme that as we care of the land will take care of us. Pastor Emerson herself, a wounded war veteran, believes that the veterans who belong to her church and till the fields of Settlers Valley are healing as they work to heal the land. Pastor Emerson's goal is a good one. She, along with C.J. Anderson and his grandfather, Oscar Anderson, are advocating a back to the land movement. By working on the land, the back to the land veterans are not only beginning to recover from drastic effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, but they're also demonstrating an alternative to industrial agriculture, which has its grip on the country. Pastor Emerson takes the idea, care for the land, it will take care of you, into the spiritual realm. She advocates that not only will the land help cure a troubled mind and a wounded body, but it will nourish a soul. At the risk of defying my father's and his father's advice to steer clear of religion, I will share these circular words of support for Pastor Emerson. You go, girl. With Pastor Emerson's upbeat and far-reaching goals for the Link Lake People's Church, the Link Lake community is suffering from pushback it is not known in recent years. There are those who want no part of Pastor Emerson's sin theology of any theology at all, as they refer to it. Of course, that is their right, and I will be the first to defend them when they wish to question what the Link Lake People's Church is all about. And that's where I'm going to stop reading right now and suggest that if you have some questions, you might ask me. The story has an interesting ending. It's not as bleak as things sound here as things begin to work themselves out. But questions, comments, we've got a few minutes to do that. And I guess you have to be unmuted in order to do that too, huh? Is that true, Nels?
As I unmute myself, yes.
So anybody with a question or a comment, some of this, I'm sure some of you are thinking that apps is going off the rails here. And that's okay. Once you get to my age, it doesn't matter much anymore if you're off the rails or not.
So Jerry, are you seeing this in some of the areas of our state?
You bet I have. This is fiction, but it's also reality. One of the interesting things for me, at least in writing fiction, almost all of it is based on reality. I make up the characters, I make up the towns, and I make up some of the groups, but the essence is the truth. I don't know if it's what fiction writer novelist said this, but it went something along these lines. Fiction sometimes can be more truthful than nonfiction. there's a lot to that. I'm a great fan of John Steinbeck, and his Grapes of Wrath story told us more about the Depression and what the great drought was than anything written by academics or nonfiction writers. That's one of the reasons I keep writing fiction along with my nonfiction, because it allows me to go into areas where nonfiction might get me into trouble. Also, Dave, one of the things I want to try and do is to not be preachy. And how do you avoid that? I create preachers. The preachers do the preaching. But it's as I travel, and I'm not traveling as much as I used to, but for a number, I left the university 25 years ago, more than that now, and I traveled the state. I was from one end of it to the other, and I listened carefully. I talked to large groups and small groups and happy groups and unhappy groups and the whole sphere. And a lot of what I'm talking about here, I picked up from these 30 years of traveling around the state. Somebody else.
How has your work been received, Jerry?
That's a very good question. By and large, very positively. I continue to rub some people the wrong way especially with my fiction, and that's fine. I'm not unhappy about that, but by and large, I've been more than pleased with how my stuff has been received. I've written a whole bunch of books about what early farm life was like, and because I grew up during the Depression and in World War II. And those books have just touched a nerve with a lot of people. Just a quick story that keeps me bolstered. Two little stories. One is I got an email from a young woman in Oconto, a farm woman, and she said, "I want to thank you, Jerry, for writing these books about farm life." She said, "My husband was injured in a farm accident, and I was afraid that he was going to commit suicide. So I went to the Oconto library and I said to the librarian, do you have anything that I might share with my husband, as he's not doing well?" And she bless her, she suggested several of my books. And she wrote back, and this is oversaid, I'm sure. But her words were, "You helped save my husband." Well, geez, that's the sort of stuff that keeps me writing. The second little story, woman down from Mineral Point area wrote to me, and she said, "I want you to know that my dad was a big fan of your writing, and he recently passed. And when he was dying, he asked me to read from one of my books." That just sends me right out the door, and it keeps me. So the reactions are all over the place.
Sure.
I also I should mention this. As you know, we have lost in this country and in this state enormous number of small family farmers. Enormous number, and the suicide rate of farmers has been horrific. It's terrible. So I've spent some time working with those who are charged with helping to prevent suicide prevention, to prevent the suicides occurring, and I'm suggesting the power of the story as a way of getting to people who are troubled. That's why the fiction is a story, of course, and my nonfiction, that's all stories as well. So I feel very strongly about the power of the story and keeping us well. I taught creative writing for 40 years, and I encourage everyone in my writing classes to keep a journal. Write down what's happening in your life in your journal. Write down your stories. Stories are powerful, powerful things. And a fiction, if it's done well, is a powerful, powerful way of getting people to think about something they may not have thought about before. Longer answer than you wanted, but there you go.
Oh, that's fine. I see John Severin has his hand up. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, Jerry, thanks for sharing your writing. I grew up in a small town as well, and I think one of the things that I recall is that there were certainly no shortage of people that had strong opinions. But on the other hand, we knew enough about everyone in the small town that we knew that people who had different opinions weren't necessarily, bad people. And I kind of feel that social contract, social trust diminishing a little bit, and it sort of came out in the writing that you had done. And I haven't lived in this small town for a long time, but I'm afraid that whatever's happening in larger communities is also happening in the small towns as well. And I kind of wondered if you might see if that's resonates with the themes that you were writing about as well.
I would say that's absolutely true. I still have a farm west of Wild Rose. We bought it in 1966. It's 2 miles from the farm where I grew up. And so I know my neighbors and fairly well, and we get along just fine. And I know they have beliefs that are very different from mine. And they, for some reason, we're still getting along. And in the old days, no matter how different we were from each other, we would speak the same language often, the Germans and Norwegians and the Poles, and they were all together because they had to get along. They had to work together. They couldn't survive. And so the idea that you are different from me just doesn't matter. We are all in this together, and we've lost that. A lot of that anyway. And I feel badly about that. I'm now working on a new nonfiction book. A publisher from Denver asked me to do this. A new nonfiction book on the importance of rural communities and how we can make them better. That's one of the more challenging projects I've ever worked, because I start with looking at the history of what rural communities are, and then I talk about when they came apart as farmers dwindled down to precious few. And now where are they going? And they're struggling, many of them. Some of them closing down entirely. Somebody else.
Hi,
More interesting question.
Jerry.
Yes.
This is Joanne Ronning. Thank you so much for, that was a great sampler teaser to buy your book, I'm telling you. I want to get one for sure. And it hits close to home for my family because we had a beloved Uncle Ole, a Norwegian bachelor farmer who kept the family farm in North Dakota. And we all loved that little town, but nobody wanted to take it over and live in North Dakota, I guess. But we all worried about what's going to happen to the family farm. And yeah, I actually prayed about it because it distressed my uncle, what is going to happen to this farm. And my cousin, who was a US history professor in California, interviewed our uncle out by the barn, and he asked him lots of questions about what do you think is going to happen to the future of the farm. And I should share that with you sometime. I think you would enjoy it. Anyway, what did happen was a man bought it who wanted to come home to North Dakota. He grew up in North Dakota, and he was not only a veteran, but a retired state patrolman, highway patrol up in Alaska for many, many years. And he realized that he was suffering from PTSD because they gave him way too much territory, way too much responsibility, and he recognized it and asked for help, and he did not get the support he should have. So he moved with his wife, who's a retired minister and was actually became his therapist, And he bought my uncle's farm, and I finally got to meet him. We corresponded for a couple of years, and this last summer I got to meet them on the, go to our family farm. And he talked to me about, he told me about the PTSD and more details. And he said, this place has been so healing for me. He said he always was a farmer at heart and wished he could get back to the land. And it is amazing what he has done with the farm. In a drought, last summer there was a drought, and he made beautiful gardens. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I only wished my family could have all seen it. The ones that are still surviving, the cousins, I was so excited to tell them and give them, show them pictures, but it sounds like this story you've written. I mean, he's so grateful to have had this healing feeling of, he loves working on the farm, and it shows. And so anyway, thank you.
Thank you. That's a great story. By the way, the one of the messages that threads through through my story several times, I've mentioned it already, but as you heal the land heals you, or the other way around. And that in that there's research to back that up. By the way, that's not just Apt's idea. That's been around for a while now, and it can be as simple as a garden, a little vegetable garden you have in your backyard. It doesn't have to be 20 acres or 10 acres or 5 acres. It can be just a little spot in the backyard. Digging in the dirt somehow has a therapeutic dimension to it that you recognized. It's in the same category as when you're feeling tough, go out and walk in the woods. I suggest time, and that is a very healing process too. Anyone else?
I've got my daughter's bought me a subscription to Storyworth.
Yes,
And,
wonderful.
and I'm not a writer like you are. I'm amazed at what you read, but a Storyworth, for those that aren't familiar with it, is you are given a topic to write on every week. And at the end of the year, you've got 52 chapters of different things. Like my kids picked out things like, how did you get your first job? What was your newspaper delivery job like? How did you get the job? What was your mom like when you were a child? What were your grandparents like? How did you go on vacation? Where did you go on vacation as a child? And all different types of subjects. And every week I got another one. I'm a little behind on them, but it's
That's wonderful.
It's really, now it's fun to do in a way.
That's the sort of thing I've done in my writing workshops. I call my writing workshops telling your story. And this sounds a little extreme, but I say this to people: when we forget our stories, we forget who we are. When we forget our stories, we forget who we are. That stopped everybody cold. Somebody else with a comment?
So Jerry, it seems to me that the land has really gone through the theme of your books, because if I remember right, your first one was called This Land Still Lives.
Land Still Lives, my very first book. I wrote in 1970. Oh my gosh. And it was just reprinted by the Historical Society. I knew Gaylord Nelson, and Gaylord Nelson wrote the intro to my first book. And interestingly enough, it's repeated, of course, in the new book that just came out. And what Gaylord Nelson said about what we must do to assure an environment that's alive and well, this is what he said in 1970 is as important as it is 2022. It's just as important. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Tyrone, are you trying to get in? I guess not.
We're in. We're in.
I hear a clock ticking. That must be somebody's. Anybody else have my daughter was on.
Maybe you're not muted.
Susie, you have a question for me? Susie, you're still muted. You got to unmute yourself or somebody can let.
Morning, everybody.
Yeah, that's my daughter.
No,
Susie.
I've been here listening and stapling some things while I listen.
Susie and I have done several books together, but she has recently published. Tell us about your new book on gardening for kids, because that's right along the line of what we're talking about today.
Yes,
Susie,
I have a new. Well, thank you for the call out. I don't have my Sunday clothes on, so you'll have to just excuse the flannel. But yes, I am. It's really good to see friends I know from Midvale, by the way. It's been really fun to listen. But I have a new book coming out in the spring called Seeds in Soil. And it's a book for families, not just kids, about gardening and how you can, how just starting, like my dad was just saying, how just starting a garden can be a way to connect families with each other and a way for kids to learn about their own history. So it's not just a gardening book. There are so many gardening books available. There are gardening books with crafts and how-to books and gardening books that identify plants and flowers and things. So this is really not that. This book is published by the Historical Society Press, and I started each chapter with a primary source document picture because I'm a full-time second grade teacher. So I really wanted the book to be also used by educators to help kids understand how they can learn more about history by using primary source documents. So each chapter has a picture or a thing that they can look at. And the beginning of each chapter has inquiry questions so that they can observe the thing and think about it and ask questions. So the book is not just about gardening, but teaching kids how to use inquiry to ask questions about the world around them. And also, I love the idea of having sort of a writing prompt every week and then being able to write down your idea and your history. That's amazingly what my book is about also. So there's actually a little section in the book about how to interview someone who also has a garden and to talk to them about what their gardening history and their family was like. Because like I said, it's not just about gardens, but more of a way for families to connect with each other and be outside. So that's just a little mini tidbit about it. Yes, but it's not out yet. It's coming out in the spring.
Susie and I have also done a cookbook together, Old Farm Country Cookbook, based on my mother's recipe box, who cooked with a wood stove, no electricity, no running water, wood stove to heat things. And we have the recipes from that and a little bit about how to do wood stove cooking. Susie was in charge of all the recipes, which became quite a challenge because my mother assumed that everybody knew how to do all this stuff. And so she just had the ingredients. She never said what to do with them. But that's a different story. Anybody else have a question about Settlers Valley? And let me show this again in case somebody is wondering. If you want to get in touch with, see what I've done, go to, can I get it? I can get a little closer.
If you raise it up just a bit, we can see the place that you're thinking about.
Can you see it all now? Yeah, it's jerryapps.com is my website that has descriptions of all my books. I do a lot of TV stuff too, so that's on there. And then my email address is there. So, And don't forget, if you're interested in the book, stop by Mr. DeMia on Monroe Street, and they have the book. So, well, thank you so much, all of you, for tuning in. I appreciate it very much on this snowy day, and it's a chance to get to see folks I haven't seen for a while. My gosh, I think it's been over a year since we've been in person in church. Terrible. So anyway, Nels, do you have some closing comments?
Well, a couple, but first of all, Jerry, as always, you bring to life, or you remind me what life is about in ways that just really grounds me, and I thank you for that. Your writing is quite beautiful, and I think your topic is timely, and it just sort of I'm reminded of that cartoon where I think it was Pogo that said, "We've seen the enemy and he is us."
All right.
And your writing just kind of resonates that and brings it back to, a reality of dealing with the earth and what we have to deal with. So thank you again, sir. But next week we do have a presentation again from, this time it'll be from the Department of Transportation. And people may not realize this, but they deal with a wide range of things, including ferries, air travel, as well as the roads, which are so critical to rural America. And so the Assistant Deputy Secretary, Joel Nielsen, will joining us. So I hear people signing off, and I just want to wish everybody to be safe. Thank you again, Jerry. We'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Okay, happy shoveling.
Thank you. Thanks for introducing your Susie. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That was great to meet Susie. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.